you're really shooting for the 100% success rate. But it's not the case. Good people will die essentially regardless of what you're doing.
Hi, I'm Captain Adam Orton with the Canadian Army Podcast, and this episode is going to be about medics. I can't think of a support trade that's better represented in TV and the movies than medics, but it's more than just plugging bullet holes. And to unpack all this is Master Warrant Officer Jean-Sébastien Morin from the Canadian Forces Health Services Group. And we're talking about medics. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you.
So I think we want to set the tone for this coming out of the gate. Tell us for you a story or something that represents the ultimate medic experience from some point in your career.
I think if I had to pick one, for sure it took place overseas where really you live and breathe this particular experience where you're with the troops, you're attached to a company, you kind of live that almost childhood dream where you see in the movie the medics accompanying the troops, and they're really there to make sure everybody gets home safe and sound with, well, I guess their entirety of their limbs and everything else. But I was attached to a hotel company with a 2 RCR battle group, and I think just walking through this open field, and when our first contact happened, and we started placing ourselves and doing our thing and responding to the ongoing attack. And that was my first experience where just going around making sure everyone was good was the starting point where you really felt like you're there, you're the only resource. This is what you were trained for. You've put in a lot of hours through simulation, through training, through different career courses, and now it's culminating into there. And it almost seems surreal because there's nothing else out there. There's no other ambulance parked at the corner of the street and to get you out of trouble or come and get your casualties right away. So the adrenaline is going. You're trying to make sure everybody's safe, and you're really focused. And it's impressive how the training and with the repetition and everything you've done and how the Army has trained you and how you've gone through multiple scenarios trying to do it enough that you can't even do it wrong anymore, then you're ready to go. And then you're always kind of second guessing yourself, but at that point it's where the rubber meets the road or the pavement, and that's where it kind of took off. It was good enough at that particular time, that no one got hurt. It was just mostly people falling off those walls, those small mud walls and whatnot, right. and getting stuck, and you hear, "Doc, come here," and then and they just probably roll an ankle or something like that, but nothing. I guess at that moment, people are on the adrenaline high, and they don't necessarily know if sometimes they're even hurt. So that's really where you felt like you were doing your thing. And so there's not necessarily a far-fetched scenario that really encompassed everything, but I think that's the closest that I can think of how represented us as medics.
Yeah, and it's interesting also that, you're talking about that sense of until you've been there, you don't know. And then even if something serious didn't happen that particular time, you come away with the sense that you actually knew what you were doing. and then it feels good that you're just like, oh yeah, we did all this stuff. And I didn't feel confused or uncertain at any point. It made sense, and now I know I'm ready.
No, absolutely.
So you're coming out of recruit school, it's day one, it's time to become a medic. What does that look like as a brand new soldier heading into this trade?
I guess the existing model that's been going on for a while now is essentially after BMQ or a basic military qualification, you get out and then you head out to Borden, Ontario, where you're, I guess, welcomed by the Canadian Forces Health Services Training Center. And at that point, you go through, a phase that's more focused on the clinical aspect. So you start going over the different areas of clinical care where you learn how to do physical exams, and you go through a series of testing and just the basics of taking a blood pressure for the first time, examining a knee. You kind of go through all the different testing and exams you could be performing on someone, and even how to question people. And it's not something that comes naturally to people. And so it's your first point where you start learning how to interact with patients. And that's a very important aspect because it'll serve you well later on in your training and in your career. Once you've done all this clinical focused training. Now you move on to the primary care paramedic training, which essentially you travel now to Moncton, where there's the paramedic academy, which they will train you on paramedicine. So you go through what the civilians will go through. When I did it, it was 6 months long. It was an accelerated program because you're there every day. You just focus on the course itself, and essentially you become a paramedic. And that's, I guess, a very appealing side of a lot of people, and for me as well, where you do a lot of medicine in a context where it's urgent. There's a lot more action, let's just say. It's less deliberate or slow-paced than the clinical phase. Once that's done, you pass all the exams, and then you're officially a paramedic. And then you go back to Ontario, to Borden, where you conclude your training with the field portion of your training of your RQ3. So you're there, and then you do a lot of what the health services will be doing in land operations for the most part. It's impossible to cover everything. As you know, that it's a purple trade. There's no time or opportunity at that point to make you a master at everything right out the gate. So the intent is really to make you a soldier where you can now apply all the skills you've acquired in the past months prior to that as a paramedic and as a junior clinical type individual, and you apply them in the field. So you go through several scenarios, and then it's graduation day and posting to your first unit. So in a nutshell, off you go. So we do have a large scope of practice, which encompasses those two main areas. So the pre-hospital, which you do with your paramedicine course, and then the more clinical bedside care and nursing type skill set, which you do in Borden. So, and then you kind of fuse all of this together, and you become officially a medical technician.
Let's talk a little bit about the piece that comes afterwards. So we'll focus on the Army aspect because that's kind of that's what we're here for.
Absolutely.
So you've emerged from training and you're ready to do some business. How do you get streamed in whatever direction? Because I know, for example, like in my experience with medics, sometimes they're attached either at a battalion level and then they're coming out and doing training and exercises in the field, or they wind up in a clinical setting and they kind of bounce around a little bit. How does that kind of work?
So essentially, when you get to your first posting, and I think sometimes it's luck of the draw or faith, or there is a plan. I know in the career managers, I guess everything in account, but as a young private or corporal, fresh out of training, you just sent. And then for me, it was just, you're going to 5 field ambulance, and okay, I just packed my bags and went there. Off you go. So when I landed, I guess at 5 field am, right off the bat, you're kind of pushed where the needs are. So the brigade and the units kind of look at where they need to distribute their people. It's almost, again, another luck of the draw where you end up starting your first gig. And I did, for myself, end up working in a UMS or a unit medical station with 5 service battalion, which at first, being an old gunner and knowing that things were unfolding in Afghanistan and business was going to happen and medics and troops were going to be deploying, I was really anticipating being deployed. Although I was junior, I was being told, hey, calm down, or you're still learning, and what we'll see. And but I would constantly ask to go. Then again, to come back to where you can potentially go, for me, I went to a clinic. And it was just a short stint. And then after, I moved to the evac platoon, where a lot of my peers ended up at the care delivery units, aka the base medical clinic, where they worked and just saw people constantly. So I guess at that time, there were the UMSs, the more of the base hospital type of people, and of course, more of the field type, where I really wanted to go. And I got my chance to be, I guess, moved to the field area where we focused a lot on training, and as well, we did a lot of supporting activities where we supported the base units. So in the land or army world and in the general context, this is where medics will go first, where they can be sometimes mentored or coached by more seasoned medics, and then kind of developing your tradecraft from there.
Yeah. And so on that subject, people generally have this mental image, and you kind of describe it like, I think it's more of the private corporal level is, the soldier that's like embedded with a platoon or maybe embedded with a company that's running around and like doing, medical stuff on people that are injured. But that's just a very small slice of the whole medical structure that may exist even in a combat environment, like even on a deployment. So maybe describe for people who don't necessarily know, like buddy gets injured or maybe like, in combat something happens and you got your tactical combat casualty care people that are embedded in the platoons working with the medics and they're doing immediate life-saving aid. Well, there's a whole other system behind that to get things moving. What does that look like?
Initially, in that context, where you're the senior medical authority on scene. So, and it's impossible to be tending to everyone at the same time. So a lot of rehearsal happens prior to that. A lot of work and time has gone in during training to have the members who are TCCC qualified to assist you. So depending on if there's a lot of wounded soldiers or there's just one person, the scenario will unfold quite differently. But what the main focus is, you being, I guess, the leader, where you direct people. And then, so if you're still under effective fire or under contact, of course, minimal care will be done. And your peers that are trained as well will know that you do the minimal things, get the people out of trouble, and as well win the firefights. And then once everything's said and done, you've won that battle, and now you move on to more extensive medical work. So you prioritize everyone, or if you just have a patient, you start working, you start assessing, you have help, and people, of course, are covering your six and actually all around you. So they provide a security. You're there, you're applying your skill set, trying to do whatever is required to make that person live, just to survive, essentially, the ride back home or the ride back to a more definitive care center. So at that point, there's a lot going in your mind. You're thinking, what's my next move? Actually, you have to be 2 or 3 steps ahead, keeping situational awareness of what's going on, looking at what the fellow soldiers are doing to help you as well, even if they're doing it right. You're providing as well a lot of updates to most of the time for an infantry platoon, which I have experience with, and you're sending reports up. At that point, you have to think, what's their exit plan? Because you won't get the luxury sometimes of having a helicopter just land there. And then sometimes you're going to have to haul this individual inside of a armored vehicle, or you might be able to reach out and there might be an arbor dam. So there's quite a bit of things you have to think about, and especially if you anticipate being there for a while. So getting to more cover, keeping the patient warm, because people that are traumatized tend to cool off quite quickly, and they've lost a lot of blood, and that particular factor is a major contributor to people dying. So even in the middle of Afghanistan, it's 40 degrees out, but people will start being a lot colder. You have to be very creative sometimes as well. Sometimes the stretcher, there's an explosion that went off. So there were stretchers were on the lav at some point, and the flash, a thermal flash, melted all the stretchers. So now,
what do you do?
What do you do?
Yeah.
I've heard of colleagues using very creative ways, from ripping a door off a building to using a donkey to move a casualty. So at that point, you need to have a plan. And I think it's something you acquire with experience, and especially back home when you get posted to your first unit, those are things that you need to develop, to always have a plan. And I would probably end on saying as well that someone told me one day, and this will sound probably cheesy and people will remind me once they listen to this, but someone told me once that when you decide to become a medic, you decided to become a leader. And that's it, because people will turn to you and say, what's the plan, Doc?
Well, like in the context of a deployment, and I think we're going to get personal here a little bit, I'll tell a story of something that happened, and I think it's probably worth talking about, because especially in a combat arms environment or, in an operational environment, bad days happen, and a bad day is a really bad day when something's happening. And I think a bad day for an infantry unit's a bad day, but I think it's probably even harder, and I'd like to hear your comments on this, is, for example, on my deployment, one of the platoons got hit and, some guys got killed, and it was a really rough, it was bad. And at the end of it all, I remember seeing the medic master corporal He was sitting in the bunker and, he was crying. He was really upset because we'd been training together for years and he was really close to these guys. And he felt like he let the team down because he couldn't do it all by himself, right? And so when you're doing infantry stuff, as an example, you're running around and you're doing infantry stuff, and sometimes you don't feel the responsibility to save people's lives, but the embedded medic, it's like everybody's looking at you. You're talking about being a leader and stuff like that. How do you handle that? Like, what would you say is a way to deal with that?
I think there's a lot of different ways that people deal with those types of situations. And it's, I guess, an impossible task to be 100% prepared. Depending on your background and how you were raised and how you were brought up or life experiences as well can influence that. However, there's always when you've been through some hardship and whatnot, and that kind of helps as well. So there's tidbits here and there, past experiences, life experiences and work experiences where you kind of start putting this together, but nothing prepares you for really when things have gone wrong. And you're always kind of tearing apart every single move or every single thing you've said and done. And really, you're reliving those moments. And then you're like, oh, maybe I should have done this. Maybe I should have done that. And I guess our measure of success for medics is always the outcome of what happens. And you're really shooting for the 100%,
Right.
I guess, success rate. But it's not the case. Good people will die, essentially, regardless of what you're doing. And I think you have to start accepting that. And I guess with your training as well, you kind of understand the mechanics behind that, or where people suffer life-threatening injuries, especially in the war-fighting environments. There's people that they will not survive that initial injury, and that's what happens. And for myself, it's always kind of reflecting. You kind of go through, you beat yourself up. For me, talking to other people and kind of going over a few things always help to kind of diffuse the situation, because you can't let it become some kind of weight on your shoulders, and you have to move on. And especially at the end of the day, if you've done everything in your power to make that person survive or that patient survive, you can, I guess, rest a bit better. So I guess it's a different experience for different people. Some people will take it more emotionally, and we're all humans, and it's not something you're just processing and then delete and then you move on.
Yeah.
There's a lot, I guess, of experience that goes into it. I guess with time, you kind of build that perception where you're better at processing those events, and then it's not less of a defeat when something goes wrong. Some people won't talk about it as well. I guess there's no right or wrong answer into that. So everybody kind of processes those events differently. I remember one of my tour CR infantry I served with, and at some point he turned around during the tour and he says, "Hey, Doc, how are you doing? You're always asking how we're doing, and I feel like we haven't been like really up to par on this.
Yeah.
So how are you doing?" And then it was kind of the middle of the tour, and I was like, "Well, do you have a few hours? And because I have a few things to let you know, to get off my chest."
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess there's no perfect answer to how to process. Days have gone not so well, but everybody kind of, like in life, kind of processes things differently.
I like also that, you said it twice already, and it makes me laugh every time. Like, I think of, my time, and it's just like, doc. You call in the medics doc, and they're like, "Yeah, we're not doctors, we're medics." And it's like, no, you're doc. And everybody loves the doc. That's the old joke is, don't make your cooks or your medics angry. It's like that close relationship with that as a team. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think we've been called several different names through history. I guess having different jobs and kind of evolving through the ages. But I think this one, Doc, always is very movie-like, but I guess it's something that people actually use. And I guess it's a lot easier to say than, "Hey, medical technician," or "A medic, come here." However, I did remind people as well, like, I'm not a full-blown medical doctor. I don't have a doctorate in medicine. But I guess you're that maternal or paternal figure, and then typically it's just used in the Army environment or the field deployed areas, or when you run into some old friends as well, which you deployed with, and they'll call you Doc still.
Yeah.
Or even like Doc and last name. But It's really an affectionate name.
Yeah. Can you explain a quick difference between, like, in 1 minute or less, the difference between med techs and medical assistants? Because I think that's important.
So for med techs, in general, are regular force individuals. They've gone through the training I've talked about before. Med A's or medical assistants or primary reserve counterparts where they do have a smaller scope of practice. Given the fact that they don't go through the exact same training, they can, which eventually, if they do all the reg force training, they will adopt the med tech nomenclature. However, for now, I guess to make a very easy delineation is that the med A's will have a smaller scope. They still support exercises and different operations. So they do have a bit of a different skill set, but still serve a very good purpose. But I think we want to refine that and actually maybe just kind of make it just the one skill set in the future. But that's more to come on that. But the difference is where they're employed and how much they can do.
So we talked a lot about, the medics, but you have a very specific role. Talk to us a little bit about your role and kind of like what the future of the medical trade holds right now. It's a big question, I know.
So yeah, in the last few months, I've been added to the team that's located under the Director of Personnel Generation Requirements. That particular directorate looks after military employment structure. So essentially, in a nutshell, we're conducting a study and looking at how we can make the medtech trade and the medical assistant trade better. We're talking full-scale review and study through a very deliberate process. We want to ensure that the medics do have all the tools, the abilities, and I guess even to kind of set that culture, even the personality, or kind of having really everything kind of fall into line that you get the best version of that person that day that will have to deal with a casualty. So you can't just stay idle, and warfare is advancing. There's new things every day, and never mind what COVID did to the entire world. And as well, it's no longer like symmetrical warfare. And I guess this fear for me that become irrelevant. I want to keep the medics on the battlefield relevant and a lot more effective. So the more effort you pour into producing the best medic, the better the chances of success.
So why did you become a medic?
Back in, I guess that was in 2002, I was a reserve artillery gunner. And I was going to school in college or a CEGEP and learning about politics, anthropology, and sociology, thinking I was going to change the world. And I guess it's just when you're young and then you kind of gullible, or you're looking at like, I'm going to make a difference and whatnot. And I guess faith or destiny struck. And my buddy was knocking on the door and said, "Hey, JS, do you want to go to Bosnia?" And I said, "Sure, let's do it." So I paused school and went to Bosnia. And that's where I guess this entire experience kind of transformed me and really gave me that realization of I wasn't going to change the world anytime soon, but I could definitely make a difference in someone's life, one person at a time. And I think looking at what the medics were doing, and they were with us, and the appeal of them always learning new skill sets or just new knowledge, because medicine is all constantly evolving, and that was very appealing to me. It wouldn't be something that you just learn and it just stays like that way. That kind of culminated into me putting my paperwork for occupational transfer to medic while I was still serving in Bosnia. And really, I think it started from there. I would say that as being a gunner, and you're like, oh, I don't want to do too much of this field or live in the trenches or whatever. But
Yeah.
like the hardship or some kind of silly thought like that. And you're like, the medics have it good. Look at them. They have chairs, they have an ambulance. And a little that I knew was actually, I think I've done more Army-centric and gone through a lot more hardship being as a medic. But at the time, I was like, you know what? Seems like a pretty good deal. And from there, I knew this was the gig I'd be doing probably for the rest of my life.
And then you did.
Yeah, no, and then here I am.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks so much for taking the time to, unpack all of this for us and explain what it all looks like. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, you're welcome.
That was Master Warrant Officer Jean-Sébastien Morin from Canadian Forces Health Services Group. If you want to talk about something or have an idea for a show, shoot us an email. The email's in the show notes. As usual, I'm Captain Adam Orton. Orton out.